So a lot of what I'm talking about tonight is from this book called Myths America Lives By. And it's by this author named Richard T Hughes, who is a scholar that happens to be a Christian. And he wants to talk to us about what it means to live out these myths that we experience as citizens or neighbors in America. And Jules has got the waters and the beers. Thank you, Jules. Everyone say hi to Jules.
Hi.
Jules.
Hi, Jules. I live to serve.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna, because we're so like lame school here, I've got the PowerPoint on the laptop. If you want to follow on your phone, you go to christchurchpdx.org/USA, right? So you go follow this handy dandy presentation on your phones, christchurchpdx.org/USA. It's also on our Facebook page if you, for some reason, prefer to be on Facebook while we do this. So a little bit about me. The first time I ever went to Washington, D.C., I was in elementary school, and I got a tour by my congressman. His name is Mike DeWine. I lived in Ohio at the time, and Mike DeWine is one of those like family Republicans. He was in office forever. He took my family on a tour, and I have no idea how we got that tour. It was really kind of interesting and fascinating. There were like maybe 2 other families with us. If you've ever been to the Capitol in Washington, D.C., you can sit at a desk where you can hear the voice of somebody at the other end of the room, because it's architecturally situated in a way that you could even hear them whispering even louder on the other side of the room than if somebody was talking to you right next. Congressman DeWine had a lot of funny stories about politicians over the years eavesdropping in on their rivals on the other side of the room. Before Sarah and I moved here to Washington, D.C., I worked at the One Campaign, which is an advocacy organization fighting AIDS in Africa and empowering people from all walks of life to live to the biggest of their potential. And it started by Bono and Bill Gates and a number of other folks. And so advocacy for me, using our voices in Washington to impact public policy, is a huge deal to me. And I ran our faith outreach, which meant that I was in synagogues and churches and Muslim community centers, and I spoke at a big Christian rock concert next to the Chick-fil-A cow. It was really weird, but it was a good time. So for me, faith and politics are something we should talk about. I think maybe our moms and dads or our grandparents might have said, faith and politics don't mix. We don't talk about faith and politics together, or we don't talk about them at all at the dinner table. So that's why we're meeting in a bar to talk about them together tonight. So I think that we have to talk about faith and politics because we're inheriting a really weird mess of things, faithfully and politically. So that's what we're talking about tonight. He's just a baby Christian, Donald Trump. President Trump, the 45th president. So we have this president that likes to tweet, and his wife, his spouse, is committed to fighting online bullying. And anyone that doesn't see the irony in this is out to lunch and having a good time at that lunch. I think what we find today is the full realization of what is called the religious right, that they would cut short their values to the point of backing a man like President Trump. I am not a fan of the president. I'm just going to put the cards right on the table. Not a fan at all of the president. Doesn't mean that I couldn't imagine a Republican being a better president. I mean, I could imagine 10 or 12 other Republicans being better presidents than the current occupant of the White House. But I just want to be honest about that. Like, I am a full believer in the resistance. I'm like, he's got to go. He's terrible for our children. We've seen, if you read the paper or listen to the news, you've seen an uptick in bullying and people saying like, well, the president does this, or I'm Trump. We had a friend the other day, like 2 days ago. We were at the Ryan Adams concert, and our friend was saying that their daughter called their son Trump, and I was like, why is Jack being called Trump? And because his sister caught him in a lie, and so And the son laughed about it, because that's what you should do when you're a kid. You should laugh about things. It's funny. So I'm not a fan. If he's a Christian or not, that's not my judgment. It sounds like he might be. Sounds like he might not be. I don't know. But I'm really frustrated with the religious right's apologies for him all the time. I am not included. Frederick Douglass. So this speech has been going around the internet. You've got flyers. If you flip them to the other side, I want to read this speech. And this sets the tone for us, I think, tonight. I think it's important for us to think about these words, because our country is founded on some principles that are always incomplete, and we're always striving to complete them. This idea that all men and all humans are created equal in the eyes of God. And Frederick Douglass has a really important reflective word for us as people of faith. So I'm just going to read this out loud, and you can follow along on the thing. He said this, "Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast. Fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation of the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour forth a firing stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened, the conscience of the nation must be roused, the propriety of the nation must be startled, the hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and the crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. Those are intense words, harsh words, but I think patriotic words if you think about it, if you think about what it means to be an American in this day and age, what it means to be a citizen of these United States. After all, Frederick Douglass was reacting to founding national documents that said someone like him was 3/5 of a person, not even a human being. He was inhumane compared to other folks, white folks with property of land and of slaves. So Frederick Douglass, for me, is a prophet and a patriot, someone who helps us lean into the calling of what it might mean to be American, to always be pushing forward and speaking truth to power. So I hear his words today. This is a picture of Bree Newsome in 2015. She said, I had a crisis of faith. She was reacting to the shooting at that church, Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, and she was saying, I had a crisis of faith because these people were doing what Christians are supposed to do. They opened their doors. They opened their doors of the church, invited this young man to come and participate in their Bible study. And of course, he ended up murdering them in the Bible study, and he was a white supremacist. And then so Bree Newsome met with some friends, people of faith, people of no particular faith in the days after that. And they said, what do we do? And she said, I really have this crisis of faith. And so she and her friends decided to take down the Confederate battle flag, which was hanging at the time in states all across the South. And I just saw hanging from a truck just 2 days ago in Oregon. Still a thing. This is the rallying flag of people that seceded from the Union to protect their right to have slaves. And so what's going on in this country, right? Bree Newsome was a nuisance. She got arrested for this. I think she's a patriot. And when she was arrested, she quoted Psalm 27, verse 1. She said, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" I'm not going to fear people that put me in prison. I'm not going to fear men that drive around in trucks with Confederate flags. The Lord is my light, my salvation. Whom shall I fear? So this tension of being a person of faith and an American is always something that I think we need to struggle with. Always something we need to ask ourselves, what citizenship comes first? And how might that citizenship in this inclusive, beautiful kingdom of God inform how we might be Americans today? Doesn't mean we have to vote a certain way or whatnot, but it does ask us to be mindful of what is the dream of God for our land. So there are these myths, this book, Richard T Hughes, Myths America Lives By, and he has 5 myths. The myth, he says that these myths guide our collective spiritual psyche as Americans, no matter what faith you are or non-faith, that we have these 5 myths that we've been given and that we've wrestled with and that we live out consciously and unconsciously every day. And these 5 myths are the glue that keeps America what America is. And the 5 myths are the myth of the chosen nation, the myth of nature's nation, the myth of a Christian nation, the myth of a millennial nation, and the myth of an innocent nation. So we're going to talk about those 5 myths right now. So this Roman Latin philosopher named Seleucus said this in the 4th century. He said that myths are things that never happened but always are. Myths are things that never happen but always are. Myths are truths, stories. Anybody watch Silicon Valley? So, Erlich Bachman, the T.J. Miller is the comedian who plays him. He's also in Yogi Bear 3D. He likes to tell everybody. So T.J. Miller is going around on podcasts all over the internet these days and on late night television talking about that we live in a post-religious society. That actually we live in a society where myth trumps truth. And for him, that's pun intended. Like myth trumps truth. So if you can tell a good story, if you can sell a good story, if you can perpetuate a good story, regardless if it's true or not, that trumps any idea of like what is actually true. And so these myths that guide us may have been true or they may not have been true, but they are our abiding stories that we get to wrestle with every day. Richard Hughes says this: a myth is not a story that is patently untrue. Rather, a myth is a story that speaks of meaning and purpose, and for that reason it speaks truth to those who take it seriously. So it doesn't have to be patently untrue. It could be completely true, or it could be half true, or part true, or not true at all, but we start to believe in the story anyways. So the first myth, the myth of the chosen nation. I'm a big believer that words create worlds. And I'm sure, who has not heard that we are a chosen nation? America is a chosen nation. We hear politicians say it, may have heard our grandma say it, may have had our uncle say it at Thanksgiving. We're a chosen nation. We're here to set the world to rights. And people in the old world, these words, right, create worlds. The old world of Europe came over to discover the new world. Well, what did they discover in the new world? It was already discovered. There were already people that lived here. They were already like Americans, if you will, that didn't call themselves Americans. They called themselves all kinds of different tribals, communities, people that Europeans conquered. But this myth of a chosen nation is a strong myth. And I think for us, we have to choose, like, are we going to, what part of being chosen are we going to claim? Are we going to claim the position of power, the position of the people that invite we might be slightly enlightened and invite Frederick Douglass to talk to us about what does it mean to be a slave in America, or what does it mean to be a person of color in America, or what does it mean to be somebody not in the center of power in America? Or are we going to opt instead to choose to sit on the right side of history and sit with the Frederick Douglasses of our history and of our day? There were these sisters called the Grimke sisters, and Angelina Grimke was amazing. She was a speaker and writer in the 1830s in a time when women were never in public forums talking. And Angelina wrote this appeal to the Christian women of the South. She grew up on a plantation. Her dad was a wealthy slave owner, and she had her eyes open one day, and her faith compelled her to speak out. So much so that her family disowned her, and she had to move up north. And she said this. She said, "Arise and gird yourselves for the great moral conflict." And so abolitionists were people of faith. They were fighting to end slavery. They were choosing to not believe in the myths of power and prestige, to stand on the side of the oppressed, to stand with neighbors that were people that weren't even considered humans. So Angela Grimke, we get to choose the option to stand with people like her and gird ourselves for the struggle ahead. You see this in the civil rights movement. I mean, this is Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King. People of all kinds of faith marched in the 50s and 60s for freedom. People have always been pushing for us to live out our creeds as a country and to live them out better. So this idea of a chosen nation, I think I'd like to turn on our head and ask ourselves, how are you going to choose to be an American? Are you going to lift up the plights of the oppressed, lift up the plights of those who are forgotten, and help make sure they and all of us can share our stories? Or are we going to just sit back and believe these false stories that we're somehow ordained by God to conquer people and so forth? Second myth, the myth of nature's nation. Dominion or a never-ending playground. Who here has heard this idea that, well, it doesn't matter what we do to the earth, it's all going to burn anyways? You heard that? I've heard that. Oh, Isaac back in the back. Josh? I heard it last week. All right. You did last week? Saturday. So it's all going to burn anyways. That comes from a place. There's this idea called dominion theology, that God's given dominion to rule and conquer and subdue the earth. But if you look at Genesis and you look at the Hebrew there, it actually is calling us to serve and protect the earth. So if you think of a police car, and I know that our police in our cities don't often serve and protect all of us. But the doors on the police say that they're there to serve and protect. And that in the Hebrew in Genesis is actually at the core of what it means to be a person of faith on the earth, to care for the earth, to steward the earth, to serve and protect it. This idea that this nation is this unadulterated, conquerable land was at the founding of our country. And when we were a colony of Britain, and then after that, we set forth to conquer the whole land. And Lewis and Clark, obviously, were sent out by President Jefferson to scout out the land and figure out how we were going to conquer it, because there were great resources at play that we needed to take. Of course, the country is beautiful, but also there was stuff in the country's land that we could get out. The Associated Press said this on May 29th. Earth is likely to reach more dangerous levels of warming even sooner if the U.S. retreats from its pledge to the carbon dioxide pollution, scientists said. That's because America contributes so much to rising temperatures. The Paris Treaty, the Paris Accord that President Trump pulled out from, is actually a treaty that wasn't going to do enough, really. It was like a Band-Aid on a problem, but at least it was a Band-Aid. If you rip off a Band-Aid on an open wound, it's going to be even worse. And that's what's happening. So with America backing out of policies like the Paris Treaty, it's highly more likely that our seas will rise because temperatures will rise above 2 degrees. And we can't just flip out light bulbs to fix this problem. Our elected leaders in Washington need to come up with big, major solutions. to make sure that doesn't happen. And so I think that what happens when we back out of the Paris Accord and we just say, well, it doesn't matter, it's all going to burn anyways, is rooted in this like manifest destiny that we're just supposed to conquer and have dominion over all the earth. That's a myth I think we need to reject. Third myth, the myth of a Christian nation. Got President Bush in front of a lovely white painting of Jesus. Are we a city on a hill or a dream unrealized? So, who's heard of that? We're a Christian nation. We've all heard. A lot of us have heard that, right? What does that mean? Yes. What does that mean to be a Christian nation? When you heard that, I'd love to hear a couple. Like, what do people mean when they say we're a Christian nation?
Our founding fathers were Christian.
Mm-hmm.
We were
Founding
founded
fathers.
on Christian principles.
Christian principles, yeah.
We're also really specially loved by God.
More than
More than any country that's not a Christian nation.
Except that he's loving us less because we're screwing up so much.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
That's
what my grandma said.
Right.
and that's why he sent the hurricanes and
Yeah, and the gays.
So, John Adams said that the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. That's the second president of the United States, one of the founding fathers. John Adams, much like his friend Thomas Jefferson, they had a lot of falling outs, but they were friends. The day will come when the mystical generation of Jesus, by the Supreme Being in the womb of a virgin, will be classed with the fable of the generation of Minerva in the brain of Jupiter. But we may hope that the dawn of reason and freedom of thought in these United States will do away with all this artificial scaffolding. Founding fathers were not evangelical, Bible-thumping Christians. Like, full stop. They were not. They were deists, meaning they believed in a God that wound up the world like a clockmaker. Wound it up and let it loose and let us sort it all out on our own. And, you know, some days I actually feel like maybe that's true. Like, we're just got to figure this out. But that betrays, like, the idea that there's a presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives, moving us and guiding us. Founding fathers were not Bible-believing Christians. Thomas Jefferson, in fact, has his own Bible. You can probably find a copy of it at Powell's. You can definitely look it up online. He cut out all the miracles of Jesus. You can see this in Washington, D.C., in the museum. You can see all the holes he cut out. He pieced together a Bible that he thought made sense rationally. And for him, Jesus was a wise teacher, a good spiritual guide. But he wasn't the Son of God. He wasn't in communication with God. He was just a good teacher. And a lot of the founding fathers actually believe that. And even if the founding fathers did believe in a more personal idea of God, someone like maybe George Washington, they also still held on to slaves. They were slave owners. So when we say that we are a Christian nation or we were founded on Christian principles, then why didn't the Christians write into our founding documents that all men and women are created equal? Why did they say that some of us were only 3/5 of a person? Or some of us weren't even able to vote because we didn't have property or so forth? So the idea of a Christian nation is, you got to ask people, like, well, what does it mean to be a Christian? And I think we'll find a lot of different answers, right? So this is another myth we need to think about. So this idea of these white guys sitting down with some Indians, some Native Americans, having Thanksgiving together and sharing the fruit of the land before they hand over their smallpox and kill them. Manifest destiny is tied in with that idea of dominion, conquering the earth, conquering the land. This is Andrew Jackson. Would have turned 250 years old this year. President Trump loves to talk about Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was a war hero, was a general in the War of 1812. He was also seen as like a populist president. He had what they called a kitchen cabinet. So he was elected probably the first landed elite gentry president. They had some awful ideas about race, and he had some awful ideas, especially about how to treat our neighbors who are Native Americans. And after the War of 1812, he had some folks in the army with him that were Cherokee and other tribes, and he had them arrested and put in prison because he thought, well, they helped me win the war, but they're gonna probably betray me at some point, so I need to have them arrested and put in jail. And that just set the tone for how he would treat Native populations for decades. In 7 of his 8 speeches to Congress, what we call now the State of the Union Address, he always talked about the Native question, which if you start like digging into it, it sounds a lot like what European leaders would talk about in the 20s and 30s in the past century. What do we do with the Native population? How do we move them off the land? And so he had something called the Trail of Tears, where he forcibly removed people. And this is rooted in this myth of that we are a nation of that we should conquer the earth and conquer the lands of the earth. Pope Nicholas V in 1452 issued from the Vatican something called the Doctrine of Discovery. Basically told missionaries to go out and conquer the earth and Christianize all the savages. This is the Pope saying this in the 1450s. And you didn't have to be Catholic to say, that sounds like a great idea, let's go do it. And so Protestant missionaries would go do that as well and conquer Native tribes and Christianize them. And you'll hear stories, if you research this, of Native communities in the United States and in Canada having their children taken away from them and abused in Christian schools and the land robbed from them. We have a long way to go in terms of this country's reconciliation with Native peoples. Mark Charles is a great evangelical Christian thinker on this, and he talks about how the Declaration of Independence, not only in the Constitution, these founding documents, not only talked about slaves as 3/5 of a person, but considered someone like himself, who is half Cherokee, to be not a fully human person. So you can read this on the slides. I won't read this whole quote, but he says, if all men are created equal, how are we going to really truly live that out? That's the question we have to always ask ourselves. Are all people created equal in this country? It doesn't matter. How do we live that out? How do we live out the promises of what it might mean to be American, not the nightmare for some? And the myth of an innocent nation. We have this myth that we can do no wrong, right? Anytime, have you ever seen pictures of people in times of war, especially in Afghanistan and Iraq in the recent decade? Have you seen pictures of them on the news if a bomb has hit their house? We hardly ever see those kind of things, but this happens all the time. This is a picture of a young girl that was napalmed during the Vietnam conflict. Like, she's literally burning from the acid in that attack that was in that bombing. We contribute to this. This is what it looked like to deliver slaves on slave ships. Like, we're not innocent. Like, we did this. And when I say we, like, we as a country and especially white folk. Trail of Tears. This was like like thousands of people lost their lives moving to the middle of the country out of Florida and the South, because that's what happens when you forcibly move people out of their homes. This is a picture of a shadow in Hiroshima. This is for me when I began to really realize that we had some things to sort out. I was studying abroad in Tokyo for a summer, and I went down to Hiroshima, and I got to go see the Hiroshima museum where the atomic bomb dropped. And there were these shadows that were left imprinted on walls. So this is a little girl playing hopscotch. In her last moment, her shadow from the blast was burned onto the wall as she lost her life. We did that, like America did that. That little girl did nothing wrong. So we're not an innocent nation. We have to reject some of these ideas. The prison industrial complex. Do you know that there are prisons in our states that make money and lose money if the beds aren't filled? So they make money for every filled prison bed. And so that's why the incarceration rates go up. And that's why someone like Michelle Alexander talks about the new Jim Crow. This idea of Jim Crow laws in the South keeping keeping people of color down. Well, the prison industrial complex does the same thing in a new way. Private prisons make money off of taxpayers by making sure people are filling those beds. So that's why people are incarcerated with either high penalties that don't match the crime, or they might not even be guilty of the crime. But it's important for those corporations to make money, and we don't know enough about it, so we don't speak out. About this time, you might need to order another drink and think what are we doing? How do we do this? So how do we live out our faith in America? I just have some ideas, and then I want to take some questions, and I want to invite Jules up. He's already here. Lurking. So the Bible does not have, people always want to know, what does the Bible say about government? How do we have a government? The Bible has 20 different versions of what it means to have a government. The Bible is not uniform in its idea of what empire looks like, what government looks like. If you look at certain parts of the Hebrew scriptures, you'll see in one section, they'll say that God ordained a census. King David and his leaders did a census. And then you flip a few pages to another book of the Bible later, and they're talking about the same census, and it'll say, Satan told them to do the census. So you've got people fighting in the scriptures. At Christ Church, I like to say a lot that the Bible is a library of books, inspired by God, infused with divine truth and guidance and wisdom and poetry and arguments and fights and crazy stuff. So we got to take those seriously. King Solomon was the son of David, literally the son of David. David was a poor shepherd's boy who somehow beat Goliath and became king of the whole nation. His son was the son of the king, right? And didn't have that same experience. And so Solomon kept building and building and building and building. He had 700 wives at one point. So far removed from the original idea of what it would look like to have a godly kingdom. And the kingdom all fell apart. And you had Judah and Israel, they split. And if you get in the real weeds of the Bible, you need one of those study Bibles to explain what's going on. Those two countries hated each other. And they were throwing daggers all the time. Spiritual, biblical daggers. You're a part of Satan, you're not. They fought all the time. So Solomon has an idea of this. Elijah, one day Elijah proved that God was more powerful than the kingdoms of this earth by calling fire down on 100 of the nation's bureaucrats, which I think sometimes we'd like to do, maybe. Call fire down on them. And they all died. They died. The fire killed them. And that's in the Bible. So Elijah is resistance to the next level, calling fire down on people. Jesus, here we have this beautiful modern day icon of Jesus, who was a refugee, who was a laborer, who lived and died and was resurrected under empire, occupied territory. So when Jesus tosses the money changer temples over in the temple, he's addressing faith, but he's also addressing politics, because that was the deal that the Jewish rabbis and leaders of the day made with the Romans. They could tax and make money in the temple. And so Jesus turning those tables over is not just an act of religious defiance, but an act of political resistance as well. So Jesus had some different ideas. And then we have Paul, who artfully knew how to navigate. He had the papers, he had the passport, he was a Roman citizen. So he could go wherever he needed to go in empire to spread the good news of Jesus and to start these churches and to build this thing called the church. And eventually they caught on to him, and he lost his life. If you look at Romans 13, it talks about submitting to governing authorities. And that gets us in trouble sometimes, especially I don't know if you've ever had this debate at Thanksgiving with family or friends, but you're but we need to stand up and speak out and speak truth to power. And then that person at Thanksgiving will say but Romans 13 says we need to bless governing authorities. But if you get into the weeds of Romans, it actually talks about what the governing authorities are mandated to do, which is to look out for the least of these and care for all people and care for the commonwealth. And so Paul's not saying like just let them do whatever they want. He's saying respect these authorities to the point where we might even need to call them out. At least that's how I read it. I think Desmond Tutu is a great guide for us. Desmond Tutu was the Archbishop of South Africa. He was in a very Christian nation, a white Christian nation. South Africa, if you go and study a little bit, from the early days up until the late 1980s, early 1990s, was a proud Dutch Calvinist Christian Reformed country. And all the myths we just talked about, they believe about their own country. That God had given them the land to conquer. That's why they were a proud farming, agricultural country. That God had given them clear insight on how to tame the savages. That God had done all these things to bless and ordain them. When in actuality, like, they were totally oppressing people and squandering people. So Desmond Tutu has this great line about, if you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. So we have to choose which side we're going to stand on. I'm a big believer in the possibilities of America, but we fall so short. I don't think any political candidate's going to save us. I don't think any political party is going to save us. I think we need to find people of good faith and will across the political spectrum to sort out our problems. I don't want to live in a world where there are only like super left-wing progressive Democrats, because power just does that. Power does weird things to people, right? We need people keeping us honest, and so there are great leaders on all sides of the political spectrum. We need to pray for them, but we also need to remind them that we're their boss, because we're citizens. We get to use our voice. So if you want to stay up to speed on what's going on in terms of living out your faith and speaking up for justice, I really encourage you to check out Sojourners. Jim Wallace started that community in the 70s, and they're still going today. Sojo.net. Bread for the World is a great advocacy group for hunger and poverty. World Relief, we just had Jenny Yang speak at our church on immigration and refugees. And there's a huge problem in our country about borders. These Afghan girls were kept out of the country, and they they had this science project on robotics. And why would we not want these girls visiting our country and participating in high school science fairs with our own American kids? That's because of the Muslim ban in some ways. That's what's going on in our country. We can speak out against that. One.org, of course, I used to work for them, doing incredible work on global development and global disease. And then EJI, Equal Justice Initiative, Brian Stevenson, go download his TED Talk. It's amazing. He talks about the prison industrial complex, eji.org. And then there's William Barber, who started this great organization called Repairers of the Breach. We've got Jules here. Jules ran for mayor last cycle, right?
Yep.
And Jules
Came up a little short.
Came up a little short. Where did you place?
I was second, but
Second,
it was a distant second.
Distant second.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
There's a lot of people running. Second's not bad.
Yeah.
Jules is going to talk to us about what it means to be a Christian and a politician and just a dad and a neighbor. And what are you doing these days?
I'm currently working, as you know, the bottle deposit return system where you pay your 10 cents, then you get it back. I work for the company that runs that whole system, so we do recycling. I went from politics to crushing bottles and cans, and my life got a lot simpler, but it's a lot of fun too. A lot of enjoyment in it. Different season.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your story. You don't seem old enough to run for mayor. And,
Thank you.
I
appreciate that. So my background, I grew up in Portland, grew up here in Southeast. My daycare was the Volunteers of America Center that's just 2-3
Nice.
blocks that way. Great spot. My dad used to bike into work every single day, put me on the back of the bike and drop me at Volunteers of America and go on into downtown. So sort of a classic Southeast upbringing, and he was a rabble rouser. My parents met on a hippie commune in Southern Oregon and moved up to Portland, and they got split at some point because they realized they were both stoned when they got together. It was a thing. But I had a great childhood. It's fantastic, lots of freedom. But they were not religious in any sense.
Yeah.
My mom's dad was Jewish. My mom's mom was Irish Catholic. That didn't go very well. And then my dad's came from a Christian family, but sort of rejected all of that for a lot of the same beliefs and reasons that I think have led a lot of us to question our faith and where we want to be. And so I was sort of raised in this household where the prevailing attitude wasn't necessarily anti-religious. It was just sort of be careful and follow your own path and figure out what that path is. So I sort of grew up in a, I wouldn't even call it an atheist household. It was really sort of an agnostic household, and never really subscribed to a religion or to Jesus, and it wasn't really in my consciousness. And in fact, I think like a lot of good, liberal Southeast Portland kids, I thought I was too smart for my own good, and sort of, like, I'm too good for that. I'm too smart for religion. I'm not falling for that stuff. And my grandmother, when I turned 21, gave me a Bible for my birthday. And thanks, Grandma. Bible for your 21st birthday. That's
Right.
exactly the gift a 21-year-old is looking for their birthday.
Was it King James?
No, it was NIV.
Oh, okay, NIV.
Embossed with my name.
Yes. I have a grandma NIV embossed Bible as well.
Yeah. So that went on the shelf. And so, I was sort of going through life, and I was in my 20s, and kind of exploring the world and figuring things out and living overseas and doing different things. And I was really into literature at the time, and so I was into Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, favorite book of all time. And so I started reading Brothers Karamazov. And I'm like, I don't know, for those of you that read it, I'm like part of the way into it. I do not get this book at all.
Yeah.
Like, there is a lot that over my head. And it seems like it's pretty religious, but I don't get any of this stuff. So as a purely literary exercise, I'm going to read the Bible cover to cover and then come back so I have some context and reread this book. It's all it was. I'm just going to try it once, And so I started reading in it, and I think like a lot of people who try to do that, Leviticus was a real slog. Yeah. I was like, man, there's a lot of dead animals in this book, and some rules, and like, wow, these are some rules, and and then you sort of get into Judges and Joshua, and you're like, man, like march around a city a few times, and the walls come down. I don't know about that. I'm pretty skeptical about that. And keep going, and then I got to the New Testament, and it was so different than what I thought was going to be in there. I was saying to Marcy earlier, I was like, I had totally expected this book to preach at me, or this series of books to preach at me. And what I found was really more of an argument. That everything I had thought about to be anti-Christian or anti-religion was already in there. People had thought about that thousands of years before, and that these authors of the Bible were not afraid to put those arguments in the Bible and to have Jesus answer them directly. And then it was a faith that was unafraid of its own shadow, right? That was willing to engage on some of those hard questions, whether it's Nicodemus coming in the night or anything else, right? And so I was intrigued. I thought, this is different. And I wish I could say, like, right then, I was like, this is it. I'm a Christian, and I believe everything that's in here. No. Virgin birth is a pretty hard thing to get over, right? It's a hard hill to climb. And so, I sort of put it away and started thinking about other things. And over time, I'd start to find myself thinking about it and maybe praying occasionally, especially when I needed something or when something wasn't going right. And I was on this, it's a long story that I won't go into, but I was on this trip in graduate school. I was a consultant to UNICEF in South Sudan.
Oh, wow.
And this was in 2006. and it was just shortly after the Comprehensive Peace Agreement had been signed. South Sudan was still technically part of Sudan; it wasn't its own country at that time. And I'd snuck in on a People's Liberation Army permit, but technically those weren't good anymore. And as an American, I was supposed to have a Sudanese visa, which they don't issue to Americans. So I got in across the border, and then they confiscated my passport, and I was sort of stuck in South Sudan trying to figure out what was going on. It was super stressful, and I suddenly I started praying, like, Lord, get me out of this thing, and it's a funny story, but long story short, it ended up working out fine. I got out, did the work we needed to do, and I got out, and I'd been sort of thinking about that, and like, why do I only pray when I need something, right? When there's something that I want or the situation's bad. And I sort of had this, what I later kind of called the C.S. Lewis moment of, I mean, I guess Jesus either is or he isn't, right? Like it's pretty binary. And in my mind, a lot of the experience that I'd had, the feeling that there is somebody there in my life, all of my experience pointed to me saying that he isn't. And so therefore he must be is. And the implications of that for me were, wow. So what does that mean in terms of how I live my life? And if he is, then he's my Lord and Savior, and there's all these things I need to be doing, and it was just this big mess, and I wasn't even sure how to confront it. So I came back to graduate school and was sort of living in this fog of like, how do I tell people about these feelings that I'm having inside, and you know, in a good secular school, and you know, like, and so there's this Army chaplain who I was in graduate school with, who hosted a Bible study in the evenings, and I was sort of, you know, a little curious, and one evening I walked by the room where they were meeting, and I look in the window, and literally it's all of my friends sitting in there. And I've never felt so betrayed in my whole life. I was like, you, like, you guys have been playing for this other team and you didn't tell me, you know. So I walked in, I was like, hey, I don't know anything about this Jesus guy or Bible, but do you mind if I sit in on this thing? They said, yeah, sure. So we went in, and then he took me out every Wednesday morning at Panera Bread, because they only have chain restaurants in that town. And we talked about God and Jesus, and he was really open to answering all my stupid questions. And I came back here and started looking for maybe a church to be part of, and tried out some different things. And a buddy of mine was at Imago Dei, some of you may know, and it was back when I was meeting at Franklin High School. So he took me into Imago. I was going through a really, really rough time in my life. I was going through a divorce. I was going through really kind of questioning who I was at my core, and feeling like this world was closing in around me. And I remember getting in, and Rick McKinley is the pastor, some of you may know him. So he's given this sermon, like today's sermon is going to be about Joshua, Jonah and the whale. I don't know how many of you grew up Christian or like converted, but Jonah and the whale is class A. Come on, really? Like, read a science book. You're not getting eaten by a whale and barfed up and living. Like, that's not going to happen. So I kind of walked into this whole thing and like, okay, you know, this isn't going to be the church for me. And so Rick starts in on it and starts talking about like, okay, so there's Jonah, and Lord calls him to Nineveh, and he's got his own ideas, and he wants to do his own thing, and he's running around, he's out of control, and Lord kind of says, you need a time out here, Jonah. And so he gets eaten by this whale, and he says, what would it feel like to be in the whale, right? It'd be dark. The whole world would be the inside of this whale. It would, the only thing that you would know, your universe would end there, and it would feel constrictive and closing in on you. And you'd feel trapped in this place. And the only thing that you would have to lean on would be to lean on your faith, to say, I want out of this whale, and to recommit yourself to not being out of control. And of course, it doesn't end well for Jonah after that. But and I looked out, man, I am in the whale right now. And so that was it. That was the day I got down on my knees and said, Jesus, I'm broken, and I'm turning to you, and here to do what you want me to do. And if I'd known then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have done that. But it was,
And then you became a pastor.
I did not.
No, you became a politician.
Yeah, it's
So
sort
what's
of the
that
same
about?
thing.
Like, why would you become a politician? And
So
you're not even the right kind of politician. You're like you're a Democrat, right?
I am a Democrat,
Yeah.
which sort of makes me a purple unicorn in the
So
evangelical world.
What does that mean for you? Like this conversion to the faith and living out these Jesus principles as a politician, as an elected citizen, servant. Yeah. Like,
So-
what's that all about?
So back when I was full of piss and vinegar, and maybe I still am, but I was at this conference when I was a junior in college, and it was out at West Point. It was this big conference on U.S. military affairs, and I don't know why, but there was this Catholic priest, Father Peter, who was at the conference, and I sat next to him at the conference. And I was kind of poking him the whole time, and trying to get him to admit that somehow he was subscribing to this crutch that I didn't need. And I remember at one point he turns to me and he says, "Look, this is the simplest I can make it." He said, "Religion is a 12-step program for people who need to learn how to love." And I was like, "Ha! I got you, right? Like, I know how to love, I know how to be loved, and I don't need you or your religion."
Yeah.
It took me a long time, but I realized that he was right, right? That I needed that. And so, being a politician and being a Christian is really hard, but I don't know that it's any harder than any other job that we go through in our day-to-day lives and how we relate to other people. And Marcy, I don't know if I can call you out for a second, but can you show people your tattoo? So for those that can't see it, can you read it?
So it says more of you, less of me, and then there's a pair of shears that are kind of like symbolic for like the, I don't know what symbol it's called, but in math, like the greater than, less than.
So, I mean, I saw that tonight. I think that's a pretty good summation, right?
Yeah.
Like, more of you, less of me. And that's pretty antithetical to being a politician a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so really being caught in that dynamic of how do I live a life as a politician that's about more of you and less of me, especially when I'm surrounded by this envelope of expectations about what it means to be a Christian and a politician, and the nameplate evangelicalism that you see that I completely don't subscribe to, right? And sitting in rooms where I was the co-leader of the Christian Bible study in the legislature. I was the co-leader because I was the Democrat.
Right.
And I was the only Democrat in a room full of Republicans. And occasionally they'd start talking strategy or various things like, guys,
Yeah.
like, I'm right here. Yeah. Oh, right, we forgot. Right, sorry, there is a Democrat in here. So how do I live out in that world where I feel like a bit of an alien?
Yeah.
This more of you, less of me, and bring that to not only how I serve my constituents, but how I relate to the public and how I engage as an elected official in the world. I can't claim to have figured it out, but it's something I struggled with.
But like, like when you were running for mayor and when you were serving in the state legislature or just your active political life, like, how did you take these kind of ideas of trying to live out your faith for the common good? Like, what were some touchstones for you around that?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think to a large degree it influenced what I focused on, right?
Yeah.
So in the state legislature, I spent a lot of my time focusing on climate and the environment.
Yeah.
And, Pope Francis for, all the challenges of that institution, right? For me is a real beacon of hope, and his encyclical on the environment and on climate, and really see him as sort of leading that charge. But then at Multnomah County, I served on the county commission after the legislature, really had an opportunity to take on the issue of homelessness. And that's one of the reasons that I ran for Multnomah County, the issue of homelessness and inequity and justice that we see out there. And when you look at where a lot of the boots in the ground come from for the work on homelessness, it's from the faith community, right? And it comes from a lot of different places, and I think sometimes you can and maybe legitimately could question the motives of some of the people that are involved, but I think for a large part, it's really people who are motivated by this more of you, less of me, that are out there on the front lines trying to figure out how to make this a better place for people that are less fortunate. And I think it was terrifying for me to admit that my faith was part of why I was engaging in this. But over time, there wasn't really another way for me to talk about it, because that's really what motivated me. So
what are some of your thoughts now as a private citizen around what it looks like to live out the, if for lack of a better word, the better angels of our nature amidst such division, conflict, tweets, whatnot. Like what? How? I mean, you just had a baby.
Yeah, I got a almost 2-year-old son.
So like when you're thinking about raising your boy, we're about to welcome a boy into the world too. Like I think about this a lot. Yes, I'm gonna ask for help on swaddling and diapers. But like,
fun,
what are
man.
you like? What like? For me, it took me like probably like 2 months to like wipe the cobwebs out of my eyes about the shocking reality that like the country wasn't the country I thought it was. So like for you, what are you thinking about these days?
Wish I had a hopeful and inspiring answer for you. I don't. I'm struggling with this like everybody else is. You know, I woke up. So November 8th is my birthday.
Oh man,
It's a shitty birthday. I was really like, can I give the insane orange clown back, please?
Yes.
But it's not just about Trump, right? It's what it exposed about this country that we live in. And so, and so back to your point about myth, I think of myth a little bit differently in that myth is the narrative that provides the structure on which we hang reality many times, right? And what I realized it was that my myth of America, and that I thought was everybody's myth of America, was that we were a nation of immigrants founded on plurality. Give us your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. That we were, by definition, a people that had subscribed to democratic institutions as the basis of our identity and to that pluralistic identity. And that for me, as an American, I have no national identity, right? It doesn't mean anything to be an American. There is no American race. What it means to be an American is that I subscribe to a set of institutions that define who I am. And without those institutions, I have no idea what it means to be an American, because there isn't a race underneath that. And so when I realized that there was this countervailing myth that had been successful of America as a white Christian nation that had been founded by oppressed Christians to create a land where that particular form of European persecuted Christianity could thrive in all of its whiteness, that I didn't really realize existed. Or I realized it existed, but I didn't realize that it could ever win or was more than just a small group of faction. Not only did it call into question my faith, my adherence to the institutions, it called into question my very Americanism. And I was actually in France at the time of the election. So watched this whole thing at 3 a.m. on TV, and was supposed to go to the U.S. consulate in Rennes to talk about the election the morning of, and I couldn't go.
Yeah.
I couldn't go because, and I'm sorry, because I don't know what I'm going to say to you.
Yeah.
Because I don't know who I am this morning. And had that conversation. So what does that mean? I guess I think like all of you, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what does it mean to be active and engaged. What does it mean to give back? And especially for me, now that I'm out of public office and in sort of a different season of my life, where I'm more of a dad and more of a family person right now, and that's a really important season for me to be in. What is that? How do I engage in a way that's a role model for my son that I feel like is making a world that he wants to grow up in? Can I be long-winded for a second?
Yeah, do it.
You could tell I've been thinking a lot about this.
Yeah, no, it's good.
I apologize for rambling. So, the eclipse is coming to Oregon, right?
Apparently.
Apparently.
Yeah.
And so, I've been talking to he's actually a priest, but he's very ecumenical, who has been advising me a little bit and talking to me, and we were sort of talking about what is the nature of evil a little bit. And he was saying, well, evil is the absence of life, right? It's the void. That it's, because I was sort of talking to him about, well, as a Christian, I get really tired of these cartoonish versions of the devil that are sort of out there, and I don't know, it sort of feels like an excuse for somebody to blame this other thing with a forked tail for the things that we're doing anyway. And he said, you don't really need to concern yourself with that, because the good versus evil struggle happens at this very cosmic level. And You don't need to study evil, you need to study the light, because evil is the absence of that light. And this void, and it's sort of like the eclipse. You don't really want to look right at it, right? You want to have a contraption to be able to observe its effects, but not to stare at it directly. And I say that, and we were sort of talking about representations, I was saying, I feel like there's all this time that's spent on fear right now, and fear of the evil of the other, or of this other person, whether that's segregated by race or gender or poverty or all these kinds of things, this ginning up of evil in our culture that seems obsessed with it. And yet, for me, the most potent vision of evil that I've ever encountered was actually in a movie. I don't know how many of you have seen Amadeus.
Yeah.
So it's highly fictionalized, totally not true. But the story of Salieri, this composer, who sees Mozart, right, and can't quite reconcile his own iniquities with the amazing gifts that he sees in this petulant young child. And it works its way into his heart in envy and corrupts him over time, to the point where he feels like he has to destroy this creation in front of him because of the envy he feels in his heart. And at the end of the movie, he puts himself on the throne, which I think we're all want to do, and raises his arms as if he himself were God, and says, I am the patron saint of mediocrity, and I absolve you, right? Granting absolution. And I resonate so strongly with that, because I think we in our modern society of social media and Instagram and everything that's perfected, and Facebook, I think we're consumed by envy. And I think it's twisting us as a nation. And I think it's creating a rage and a hopelessness, because there's always this feeling that we're never complete, that we don't have as much as the person next to us. And it can't be because of what's in us, it has to be because of what's in someone else. Right. And I think that's emerging in our politics, and I think Trump is really the apex of that. And so for me as a private citizen now, how do I have more of you and less of me? How do I get rid of that envy and address that and raise my son in a world where he's content and complete and wants to live for others? I think that's the most we can do.
That's good. Well, we'll be back here again August 7th. We're going to be talking about climate change, and it's real. P.S., by the way, climate change is real. And how do we talk about it, and how do we do something about it as people of faith? So we'll see you all August 7th. Have a safe time until then. But also be rabble-rousers for justice. Turn some tables if you can. Get to know somebody, too, while you're here tonight. And thanks to Jules. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yep.